Good morning, New Day Fellowship. Sorry I'm running a little bit late today, but I'm here. Today, I want to talk about specifically David, but not really just David per se. I want to talk about how David got to be king. Because you understand, David was a shepherd boy. David, his grandmother was Ruth, was a Moabite, so that broke a lot of their purity laws about who they should marry and those type of things. And so there were a lot of strikes against David. He was the smallest, youngest in his family. He was a shepherd. He wasn't somebody that you would consider to be a ruler, a leader. He was apparently not real impressive to look at. Really, basically, kind of a nobody. Um, but let's take us back to Israel. Because before Saul, who was David's predecessor, Israel had no king, which meant that uh, they were led by uh, basically clerics or holy people that spoke with God, and God gave them direction and instruction, and they followed that. In a way, you could say that they were living in like the second Garden of Eden, because in the first Garden of Eden, it was a wonderful environment. There's debate that it maybe never even rained, that the dew in the morning was enough to water all the plants. They had all the food that they could eat. They didn't have to really work to do that. I mean, I think early on they basically say that Adam's biggest job is to name all the animals. It wasn't that he had to do anything. There also is kind of something that I'm going to get to a little bit later, but we kind of talk about worried about Cain and Abel as their children, but apparently they had other children. Um, we just don't know how many and all those type of things. We don't know about the other children, but we do know that childbirth was painless for Eve, because one of the curses was that she had painful childbirth. But we don't know how many children that Adam and Eve had. But we've got a pretty good hint that they did have them, and they had sons and daughters, and it's not just Cain and Abel. So the people of Israel are slaves in Egypt, and when God takes them out of Egypt, which was a pretty big process, but they really were set even then. I mean, yes, they had to move, and they were nomadic, and they were looking for the promised land. They were going all along the way, but at the same time, God provided food for them. God provided manna from heaven and the quail, and so provided water even. So they basically had their needs met by God, and God was their leader. They didn't have a king. They would have people like Moses or those kind of deals, Joshua, different leaders. And then once they settled in, they really over time they still had people called judges that were in charge over them, that were appointed to lead them, but they didn't have a king. And so they saw the other nations around them, and they decided that they wanted a king. They didn't want, they no longer wanted God to rule over them. And at one point, I think basically the last judge that we have was Samuel. And it said, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his son as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and his name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So, what good is a judge if they're not just? And so Samuel's sons were horrible. And so so that kind of also gave impetus for the people to say, "Hey, we want a king. We don't want your sons and whatever." So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." And so they basically, said, we don't want these judges lead us. We want a king. Um, and Samuel knew that that's not a good situation. Samuel knew how blessed they were through all these years, but they didn't look at it that way. I guess you could say that this is the second Garden of Eden, and they have to find a way to screw it up too. But you can't say that it's just on the hands of Israel. I mean, we all take part in something like that. We would say, "Oh, we want this or we want that." The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, as they said. But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Saul. Samuel. This displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you." So he's basically telling Samuel, don't take this personally. They're not abandoning you, they're abandoning me. And I guess God's kind of saying, I'm big enough, so don't sweat it, let them do it. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. So Samuel goes back out and told all the words of the people who were asking him for a king. And so Samuel assembles them and says, look, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve him with chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. In other words, they're going to be soldiers. They're going to be foot soldiers. They're going to be, just grunts, as they talk about in the military. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands, commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for its chariots. When I got to go to one of Solomon's stables in Israel, and archaeologists have been digging this stuff up, and the feed troughs, the mangers, whatever you want to call it, that these horses ate out of were made out of marble. Not stone, not, these horses had stables that were fit for humans to live in. They were incredible, just by the fact that the manger or the feed trough was made out of marble. That was impressive. And so he's talking about these people are going to be conscripted to his service. They're going to have to work for him. They're going to plow his fields. They're going to build palaces. They're going to take care of his horses. They're going to do all these things. The king's going to have this done. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. So he's going to reassign what is yours because he is king, and king owns absolutely everything. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Boy, I wish that our taxes were a tenth. Let's look at one of the things, too, that also happens in our world today. You realize when you tip 15%, you're tipping more than you tithe. And when you tip 20%, you're tipping twice your tithe. And we do that all the time. But we're not being fair with God. So I just think it's funny that when we tip for service that we're way overboard. It should probably be 10% or less. I don't know. And he's saying that that your king, who was Saul at the time, Saul, David, Solomon, whatever, we're going to be taxing you, and it was going to be a tenth of your grain and your wine, and he's going to give it to his people. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flock, and you yourselves will become slaves. And so whether you want to look at it as slaves, yeah, really is slaves. It's not, you can't say, he's telling them, you're going to work for me, I'm the king, you're doing it. And if you don't, I'm going to kill you. What more is a slave? When the day comes, you will cry out for a relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. So he's warned them, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. So I guess they're also saying we're kind of getting tired of having to grab our pitchforks and go out and fight these people. And we want a king to lead us and fight our battles so we don't have to fight. It's kind of what they're saying. But if you really think about it, nothing really changed as far as having the king, because the soldiers were still your children. The soldiers were still conscripted into service, and they were just young men. And that's kind of who would volunteer. Maybe some of the older people would fight too. And then the other thing, let's look at what also changes. It's amazing if you read the stories of the battles before all of this, that something that we would consider kind of absurd and crazy, but it made a difference. Because you remember there's the battle with it. Moses, as long as his arms were up, they would win. And so they actually had people holding his arms up. The other thing the Bible doesn't tell us, but I wish it kind of did, on these battles that God was running, did Israeli men die? It doesn't really say. But it may be they, but I guess they must have if they didn't want to fight, And so I guess they took casualties too. But it was just amazing, God fought for them by parting the Red Sea. God did all these things for them. And yet they are wayward and they want a king. When Samuel heard all that the people had said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. So then Samuel said to the Israelites, everyone go back to your town. Like, I've had enough of this, go back. Well, ultimately, Saul becomes king. Samuel finds a guy who's big and strong and looks like he could be a good king, and he picks Saul. Well, then Samuel came back and said, look, I've done it. You have a king. As for me, I'm old and gray, and my sons are here with you. I've been your leader from my youth until this day. Here I stand. Testify against me in the presence of the Lord and his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Whom have I cheated? Whom have I repressed? From those whose hand have I accepted a bribe to make me shut my eyes? If I have done any of the things, I will make it right. Well, you also have to realize that Samuel was also an incredible leader in so many ways. But you have to go back and even wonder, how did we get Samuel? We got Samuel because his mother Hannah prayed. She prayed and they thought she was drunk. But she prayed that she wanted a child. And she said, the child, if you give it to me, will be in your service. And so Samuel grew up, and about the time he was 2, she turned him over to the priest. And so he lived in the temple. He served in the temple. He grew up in the temple. So I'm sure as a child he got to see people do things that are on the sly and mean and wrong. But he never did that, which means that maybe he learned that even cheating you're not just cheating, these people, but you're cheating God. And Samuel was an incredible leader. So it's kind of funny. Samuel's getting old and they see that, but they don't really pray for somebody to replace Samuel. They just kind of say, well, Samuel, I guess you're okay, but we want somebody else. So they did that. And Samuel said, I have listened to everything you said to me and set a king over you. Now you have a king as your leader. As for me, I'm old and gray. Basically, from whose hand I've accepted a bride to shut, all these things. And they replied, this is a good statement on Samuel. You have not cheated or oppressed us. You have not taken anything from anyone's hand. Samuel said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and also his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. His anointed, he's talking about Saul, because Saul was anointed to be king. And they said, he is witness. Then Samuel said to the people, it is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your ancestors out of Egypt. Now then stand here, because I am going to confront you with evidence before the Lord as to all his righteous acts performed by the Lord for you and your ancestors. And so then he gives in their story. He told them where they came from. He told them about the battles. He told them about delivering. He told about the Ammonites. He told about that the Lord was good, and all they had to do is follow him. He told about this, the great things that he had done. And so he said, do not be afraid. You have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord. Serve him with all your heart. Do not turn after useless idols. Remember the golden calf. These, they can do you no good. They cannot rescue you because they are useless. For the sake of this great name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. And yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will perish. So he goes through and he lets them know what really is going on. So Saul was disobedient. Saul won a battle, and the rule was that they were to take no slaves. They were supposed to kill everybody. They were to kill the king Agag. They were to not take any items, no gold, no wealth. They were to leave it all. Which, up front, might sound like a good thing. Oh, we got this oppressive army against us. The Amalekites are there. They're horrible. You wipe them out, we should be satisfied. That's what they're looking at. You help us win this battle, we should be satisfied. But were they? And so they actually did take things. And Saul, instead of killing Agag, Saul by this point has become a king. And one of the theories that we've had in history that keeps kind of surfacing is that kings are special people because they're anointed by God or appointed by God, and you're not supposed to kill a king, which also is great for a king to say, because that way that if you're a king and you get captured, you don't get killed either, right? So there's this kind of funny rule about kings. Well, Saul was disobedient, was supposed to kill that king, and Saul decided, maybe I won't kill this king. Maybe I'll just make him my footstool and embarrass him and be mean and all this stuff. But, I'm setting a precedent here. If I can kill him, somebody else can kill me. Well, Samuel said, you're disobedient, and God has sent me to tell you, you're done. Saul, you're done. And so Samuel hacked Agag to death. Samuel did it. He knew it was supposed to be done, and he did it. Well, Saul then becomes, I guess we could probably say mentally ill is probably the best way to describe it, because Saul was not able to rule, basically, in so many ways. And so when that had happened, after that, when Saul had fallen, when Saul had, basically fallen out of God's favor, and Saul could probably feel that in so many ways, then God came to Samuel and said, we need another leader. And I've got one. I'm going to send you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king. And Samuel said, wait a minute. Whoa. We got a king. We got a king who's got a son, Jonathan even. We got a king and the next one in line. And God said, no, you're supposed to go anoint this guy. He's thinking, man, my head will roll. That's treason. If I anoint another king and we got a king. But no, that's what he told him to do. And so Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul even hears about it, he will kill me. The Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicated. So basically, he shows up at Bethlehem. Samuel's a big deal. Everybody knows who he is. With Samuel showing up, they either know it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, but they want to know what it is, Are we in trouble or is this a blessing? We don't know, but you bother us. And Samuel said, why isn't Jesse here? Oh, he's at home. Okay. So he takes off. Said okay, I guess that's good. He didn't curse us. He seemed okay. He went on his way. He's going to go sacrifice. I guess that's okay. I don't know. So they're all just in a buzz. So he goes to Jesse and he says, Jesse, we're going to have a sacrifice today to atone for your family's sins and stuff, but I need to see your boys. And so he pulls them out. And there was, I don't know, a handful of boys. I could look and see what the exact, but he had a group. And along the way, Samuel's looking at each one and going, oh, this one's a good, strong, tall one. Oh, yeah, kind of like Saul. This will make a good one. The next one goes, man, this guy's handsome, chiseled features. I kind of like him. Or the next one goes, man, this guy's kind of like a poet. He would be kind of cool. He kind of is impressive in the arts and stuff. I think he'd be good. And Samuel's going through each one, and he goes down the line. This one, God says, no. Well, what about this one? God says, no. Well, what about this one? And he goes through the line and nothing happens. And Samuel's at this point like, God, you sent me on a goose chase. I mean, I've gone through all of them. And then all of a sudden Samuel says, wait a minute. Do you have another one? And Jesse says, sure, I've got David, but he's kind of the rut of the family. His lineage is not like my boys. My boys are all Israelite, but he's from Moab line. And so y'all don't, I don't know, he's not going to be special. He's going to be. So he's out tending the flock. And Samuel says, go get him. So they do. And they bring in a little boy, probably grinning ear to ear, kind of, they said he's ruddy complected, just kind of the runt. And in Samuel's mind, he's going, this doesn't look like a king. This can't be a king. And so he probably starts talking to David a little bit, says God, and God said, yep, this is the one. And I know that, that all of us would be like, the heck you say? What's the matter, God? If I had something in my breakfast that's not normal, I mean, what's going on? You want this guy? Yep. And so he anoints him. But then again, you realize that once he's done that, then his life's in danger because treason. He's just anointed a new king when we got a king. It's kind of like that whole, Lion King, no king, not no king. No, you idiot, I will be king. They're all kind of like, who's going to be king? What's going to happen here? And then David goes back to the flocks. You wonder, and this is one of those things that he anointed David, but I always wonder what was the conversation with the brothers. Because it doesn't really say. Did he say, David is going to be king over Israel? That would be a different thing than just anointing him, right? So you could anoint him and say he's special, which would blow his brothers away. Or you could anoint him and say he's going to be king. There would be a big difference in that. It doesn't say what he did, which makes me wonder because we're looking forward when David comes forth to fight Goliath, where his brother's saying, oh, no, you can't do that. He's going to be king. Or they go and say, well, he is special. Maybe this is his moment. I don't, you don't know what the conversation was. It really doesn't say what Samuel did other than anoint him. And so he anointed him as something special, but what's his purpose? So I don't know. That was one of the things that I still kind of wonder. But yeah, they're still the youngest, Jesse answered. He's tending the sheep. Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. He's basically saying we all will stand until he gets here. And it said he was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then they'll say, rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Samuel took the oil, poured it on him, and then in the presence of his brothers from that day, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on David. Samuel then went to Ramah. So he went to a different place. Now, told you, Saul has this mental illness. David, we know, has a heart for God. David has spent a lot of time alone with God. God has provided for David so many times. But David plays the lyre, kind of like a miniature hand harp. David plays that. He's out there. He sings. He entertains himself. He sings and plays. He's got lots of time to practice in the evenings and stuff, and the music keeps the animals away. That's a sign of a human. Why would the animals want to come bother the sheep? So it's probably helping David out through the whole thing. But you understand, too, you remember David, and he'll talk about this later, but he, says, I've killed a lion and a bear. And you're like, wow, how? It doesn't really say. We know he's good with that sling. Did he just beat him in the head? Did he just, you can concuss them? I don't know. Did he get in a real fight with them and take a knife and kill him? We don't ever get an indication that David is good with a spear. Maybe he bonked them with his staff. Maybe he shoved it down their throat and staff. I don't know. But neither one of those were easy fights. But at some point, David did those things. It's preparation. David didn't know that. David's probably just glad to get out of there with his life. But, a lion and a bear. And I don't, both of those animals are threats because they have a mouth and claws, and they're strong and they're big. It doesn't matter. No matter how you do that, there's, a human being on their feet can use 2 hands, and that's about it, because our teeth are not really that good. And yet, those critters have 4 threats, and, even with their back paws. I understand this is kind of weird trivia, but I understand if there's a cat fight, the cat on the bottom is winning, because their feet can be used to be clawing away at the other one. So the back feet are even working. So now they got 4 feet and the mouth going after the one that's on top. Whoa. Somebody said the one on bottom can be winning. I was like, if they can rip open here, that's, So you don't always look at things the way. And same thing with David. And so Saul gets mentally ill. That's the way I'm going to put it. I don't know. Now, maybe it's depression or whatever, but he's really messed up. It's dark. It's bad for Saul. And so somewhere along the line, somebody says, let's get somebody who can sing and play for him, and maybe the music will help him. We do music therapy today still. So they brought in this little kid. I say kid, but by now, maybe some time has changed. Maybe he's a little older. Maybe he's a little, maybe like teenager. I don't know. It doesn't really tell us the full story about what age he is. But he's good, and he plays, and Saul likes it, and Saul responds, and it helps him. And so they know that. So what's interesting is, of course, David's brothers are not stupid and not telling everybody about who David is or what's happened. They're not dumb. Maybe even Jesse warned them, don't you tell anybody this has happened at our house. I don't know. But he plays for King Saul, which means that he is now part of the royal family, kind of. He's up close and personal. And if you think about it, this is good training for David. He gets to see how a palace works. He gets to see the deals that are being made. He gets to see the power players. He gets to see Saul in action. What's going on? Now, it doesn't really sound like it's a long time because there's some battles. It's kind of in between some of that. But even so, God is preparing David by sending him into that environment. It's not like just Sunday he's king and he goes, okay, now what do I do? I think David really kind of had a better idea of after watching Saul's kingdom going. And the other thing that we also know has happened that David and Jonathan became friends. They developed a relationship. Like, hey, you're my little brother. There's this thing going on. But I think it's interesting, and you don't know how much Saul talked to David either. Because he may have had conversations with him again, and may not have, but it's still David's in. And the other funny thing is, if you want to protect David, where's the best place to leave him now? You don't leave him out with the lions and the bears? Are you going to put him in the king's house where there are guards everywhere? And Saul doesn't know that this is going to be the king. Otherwise, he'd be dead instantly. Obviously, he'd just cut his head off and be done. He'd have somebody else do it, whatever. David would be dead. And so he's right under Saul's nose. What better place? And so David does his thing and is called upon and whatever, and we kind of go from there. But then somehow during all this stuff, David also ends up going back to his father Jesse. Because we know that. Because we know that when and I'm going to say one statement about what David's doing. Whenever it says the Spirit from God came on Saul. Basically, I'd rather say whenever Saul was in the hole, whenever what was going bad, David would take his lyre and play, and the relief would come to Saul. He would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. See, when they say this, when the Spirit from God, I would say that's an evil spirit. That's not God. And so this sentence I don't really like, and I never have understood it. So I'm going to say no. It's I guess God would allow the Spirit, but I'm not saying God sent the Spirit to abuse. I don't know, whatever. That's one of those sentences I would really wonder how to change that. But anyway, the Philistines gathered for war, and they had found Goliath of Gath, and so it says that his height was 6 cubits and a span. Now I don't know what a span is, but I understand a cubit is this distance from here to here. You got to understand, every man has a different cubit. So how do you get a standard cubit? I don't know. But he was 6 of those, and then I guess is this a span? So maybe it's a span plus cubit. I mean, I don't know. We don't know how big Goliath was, but everybody knew he was big. And he had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. I don't know, 5,000 pennies is pretty heavy, so I don't know what a shekel weighed, and on his legs he wore bronze greaves. He had a bronze javelin. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point and the blade or whatever weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. You can imagine the shield bearer. It was a big shield too. He's got the whole kit. Now, the other thing we also understand that, I don't remember where I read it, but somewhere, that Goliath, from the time he was a boy, was trained to be a warrior. They knew he's big, and he was trained to fight. The other thing we know, which I'll get into in a minute, I've seen the verses. I didn't bring them today, but there is a verse or whatever that talks about Goliath had 4 brothers. Goliath had 4 brothers. Now, back to what is Goliath, because he's not really just another one of us. Because even somebody there's Andre the Giant, there's bigger people, but apparently Goliath was really a giant. And if you look back, and there's plenty of evidence, and I'm just going to lay it out, you can do the reading and find it yourself, but when the wayward angels were cast from heaven down to earth, they intermingled with Adam and Eve's daughters. So you had these kind of spiritual beings, cherubim, seraphim, Nephilim, whatever. This is the Nephilim group. And they had children with Adam and Eve's daughters. And when they did, that's where we got giants. Now, it's also a little weird, because you're like, well, then, didn't they drown with the flood? I don't know. But somehow we still end up, so maybe some were born after some of Noah's line, because we've got a long time in here. Maybe these spirits were still kind of around. I don't know. But that's where that we understand we get the giants. But anyway, they were there. And so Goliath was with the Philistines, and he would come out every day, and he'd get out in front of everybody with his armor. And he says, why do you come out and line up for battle? And say, basically, why aren't y'all doing anything? Am I not a Philistine? And are not you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we, basically speaking for them, will become your subjects. But if I overcome and kill him, you will become our slaves and serve us. Then the Philistine said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight together. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. This is one of the first examples of military psychological warfare. Goliath came out every day just to pick on him. There was not a single blow struck. Now, you don't know why this was going on, because it could be that the Philistines were saying, we're getting more troops if they'll just get here. And on the Israelite side, it could be the same thing. We're waiting for more of our reinforcements to get here. But nobody was in a rush to do this thing, and nobody attacked. They just sat across from each other and had tents and sharpened weapons and prepared for war, but nothing happened. And this went on for, Went on for a while. It wasn't just a single day. It happened on a daily basis. And so now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse. We're introducing David again because you've forgotten about him earlier. Who was from Bethlehem, and he was from the tribe of Judah, was a line of Judah. Jesse had 8 sons. There's the number I should have gotten earlier. 8 sons. And in Saul's time, he was very old. So Jesse was very old at the time. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Here we go. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. They'd heard the same speech 80 times. 80 times. That's a month. Now Jesse had told his son, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from me. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So Jesse still kind of believes there's a battle going on. He doesn't know they're just kind of sitting around and waiting. The other thing that I look at David in a kind of a personal way, if David was the little brother, you better learn to scrap some. Because if you've got bigger brothers, they're going to pick on you. They're going to be mean to you. So in a way, David did learn to fight a little bit just by being the runt. I mean, you pick a family, the runt's going to take the brunt of the whatever. So, David is not totally not able to do whatever. Early in the morning, David left the flock in care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out, and he reached the camp. His army was going out to his battle position, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things in the keeper's supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from the lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelite had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. So Saul didn't want to go out there and die, but Saul was upping the ante to try to figure out if somebody would fight him. Which is kind of scary too, because that means also Saul's hoping this guy can beat him. So just because you're the one that want to step forward, just because you're, I guess, the one you could say foolish enough to say, yes, I'll fight Goliath. Most thinking men are going to say, no, that's not really something I want to do. But yet he had a pretty good ante out there to go and say, hey, if you do it, you want to pay taxes and you'll marry my daughter and I'll give you some stuff. And David basically stand there. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and remove this disgrace from Israel? This Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God. They repeated to him what they had been told and said, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the wind, he burned in anger with him and said, why have you come down here? And whom did you leave these sheep in the wilderness? You're not doing your job. I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch. You're just here for the show. Now, what have I done? Said David. Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard, probably as in jest and fun, Hey, Saul, word has it, there's a kid in the army that wants to take on Goliath, And so they bring him to Saul, and it's probably kind of like, comedy. They like, you're taking on him? Funny. And I think it even went so far as Saul saying, okay, let's put some armor on this kid. And it looked funny. I mean, Saul's kind of an adult big guy, and here's this kid with all this armor, put the helmet on him, And at least I think that one of the things that David was not stupid, because David said, nope, not going to wear this stuff. Doesn't work for me. It's not me. I ain't wearing this stuff. But it also says, and this is what since I was running late this morning, I forgot to bring, I have a box of rocks. I have a box of 5 rocks. It was not my box of 5 rocks. It was Rory's box of 5 rocks. Rory, Abby, and I got to go to the area where this battle occurred between the 2 hills, and there is a stream, and they said we could pick up rocks. And the only reason I kind of thought about that recently is my daughter and we went up to Michigan hiking and stuff, and somewhere along the rocks, Abby said, our tour guide said we could have those rocks, but by what authority did he say we could have those? There was nobody around. We didn't pay any. How do we, So if we're in trouble with the government, I'm not confessing right now. But we each took 5 rocks. And also it's funny, this whole group picked up rocks. And what's even more funny is the size of the rocks. Because what size of rock goes in a sling? Some of those kids picked up big rocks thinking Goliath is big. I picked up a handful that were like this, and Rory's are a little bigger. Rory's are, so, you kind of sit there and go, what kind of rock? And the funny thing is, and these are not the rocks that David used, because that rock is somewhere in that field somewhere, unless somebody picked it up. But David picked up 5 rocks, because Goliath had 4 brothers. So David was not just preparing for one giant. David was preparing us if the brothers come. Remember, he's the runt. He knows how brothers are. He's thinking, I killed this guy, and then he's going to have to deal with his brothers too, I guess. But it's kind of funny. He didn't just pick up one. And I don't think it's a faith statement saying God's going to do it with one. I really don't. Now, is there some reason behind? I don't know. But David picked up 5 rocks. It says clearly, and Goliath had 4 brothers. So I don't know. But David may be the runt going, the moment I kill him, I'm going to have another one to deal with. And I can just see these Philistines marching out one at a time. These guys aren't thinking ahead, but I am. I don't know. And so we know, the rest of the story is they actually let him go out there, which I'm kind of wondering, from the military side, this is a distraction. Goliath's kind of a distraction anyway. But don't tell me their patrols aren't watching and everything. But Saul or his leaders and everything may have said, hey, so at some point, this is 40 days, at some point we are going to have to fight. So reading this story, this is me writing into it, I know. But I'm kind of thinking what they're really saying is, when he kills David, we attack. But when David goes out, I want you guys flanking that way. I want you guys flanking this way. I want you guys get in position, ready to go. Because that's going to be the key that says we fight. Because I think they really thought David's just going to get killed. But they're thinking, if this is a distraction long enough, we may get an advantage. And so I think they were using David as strategy. I don't know that they really believed he could do it. I really don't. I don't think that now you could say Saul said, what courage and all this stuff. But I really think the only person that believed that David could do it was David believing that God could do it through him. I don't think that David's brothers even were saying, hey, you can do this. I don't think anybody was. So I'm just telling you, that's in my heart, in my mind, David was alone. David even says to himself, me alone, I can't do this, but God, you can help me do this. Just like taking care of the bear and the lion, I shouldn't have been able to do that, but you provided, and So David goes out there, and the taunts go back and forth. I got to tell this story to a teenager in Vermont who had never heard it. And I said, you're going down. David told him, she goes, it says that in the Bible? I said, no, actually it says that I'm going to feed you to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, meaning that, the buzzards and the lion, She goes, oh, that's way better than you're going down. But the taunts, my God, I'm here as my God. David's pretty quick to say, I'm not here just as me. I'm not here to say I can take you. I'm here because God is going to work for me because you have said bad things about God. God's big enough to defend himself, David's saying, but I'm just here as a vessel and you're going down. And so the fun part of this story is really trying to reconstruct what happened. And I have that answer, at least in my mind, medically, what happened. David takes a rock and he beans Goliath right here. People that get hit right here, they get concussed. They don't die, but it knocks them out. Goliath went down. Boom, concussed, out. And then David cuts his head off. Now he's dead. But he wasn't dead until David cut his head off. And what's even kind of funny, it can be funny watching David try to take this guy's sword and, whack. Did he have to whack a lot? I don't know. But he cuts his head off. And I'm going to kind of close with that because he wins. But I'm also going to say the interesting thing that I remember as a parent, because we'd tell our kids this story. And I didn't remember about David cutting his head off. That's when I kind of got to the answer of what really happened. I started thinking about it. Because one night I'm reading this story to Rory, and David goes down, and I'm thinking, that's good enough. Goliath goes down. And he goes, read the part where he cuts his head off. And I paused a little bit, and I'm thinking, and your Sunday school teachers are reading you the, PG-13 version of this story? Cut his head off? So I kept reading, and sure enough, cuts his head off. But for a kid, and even in kids' Bibles, it probably doesn't talk about cutting his head off. So I don't know what, but he knew there's another part of this story, and he wanted me to read it. And at that point, I got to read it. And that's when Goliath really is dead, is when he cuts his head off. Okay, so today is actually Communion Sunday. I can see everybody getting that ready. Do you want to do it, or do you want me to do it, or it's all me? Okay.
Great day. And thank you for tuning in to A New Day Fellowship Church. We are so grateful that you joined us, and we pray that you were blessed by hearing God's living word. May his message inspire you to continue walking in faith, trusting that he is working all things together for your good. As we close out this service, feel free to leave a word of encouragement in the comments and share your testimony with others. Together, we can inspire and uplift those around us to live for God. Remember, this is your season. Hold on to his promises, stand firm in your faith, and watch as God does great things in your life. Continue to be blessed, and we look forward to seeing you again. Stay encouraged and keep shining his light.